We are ready to go. All right, look at that. It has been one of those days, it seems like, and so we still have a few people making their way into the sanctuary. We'll kind of let them get in here. Hello, everybody at home. All right, first off, next week is Holy Week. And so we will not have Wednesday night Bible study, okay? So, wah, wah, wah. So no Bible study next Wednesday. Take the week off. You have that little break. And then we will be back right after Easter. So there'll be one Wednesday that I won't be here. So no Bible study next week. And so tonight we're going to do something a little bit different because, again, we're trying to kind of follow with the kids' stuff and things like that. And they are deviating from the plan. These kids. Reckless. Just out of control. And so what they are doing, and I thought, it's not actually such a bad idea, is we are going to talk about Holy Week, which is next week. And some of you may be very familiar with all the little things that go on during Holy Week or how that week actually breaks down. Some of you may say, you know what? All I know is it involves Hawaiian t-shirts and Palm Sundays, and then all of a sudden it's Easter and we're back ready waiting for Christmas. Who knows? But there's a lot that goes on between Palm Sunday and Easter. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to look at some of the scriptures. There's a ton of stuff that happens during that week. So we're going to look at just a few of the things, but try to give you kind of a overall overarching view of the events that lead up to the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. So we're going to start with Palm Sunday, which is the Sunday that's coming up this Sunday. So this will kind of give you an overview of what we're looking at for next week. So the events of Holy Week are not working on my iPad. So let me redo this. Come on. Ha. Okay, the events of Holy Week. So as I said, what we call Holy Week in the church, different churches have some different traditions on what they do during Holy Week. But this is one of the, just kind of an, don't tempt me. Okay. Okay. The events of Holy Week. All right. So we're going to start off with, of course, Palm Sunday. Now, I'm not going to give you a lot of scriptures on Palm Sunday. Why? Because I would basically be reading my sermon that we're going to have Sunday. So come Sunday or tune in Sunday, and you will hear all about Palm Sunday. So there you go. Palm Sunday begins what we call Holy Week. And this is the week that Jesus comes into Jerusalem for that final week of his life here on this earth until after his resurrection. So we get that last bit of his public ministry. Now, in looking through some of this, my wife and I were looking up different things, and it's actually, even it was a little bit amazing to me how much stuff happens. And so like I said, we're going to give an overview, but there's even more stuff. So it starts off with, actually we are going to talk a little bit about Palm Sunday. I'll do a different scripture for Sunday. So it starts off with the prophecy of Zechariah 9:9, and it says, "Rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." So we have this prophecy that brings us up to Palm Sunday. And when Jesus comes into Jerusalem on that final time, when he's coming in at the end of his public ministry here, he tells the disciples, "Go get me a donkey." Gives them very specific instructions. So when he comes in, the people that are familiar with prophecy and the people who have been taught this their entire life should recognize this and see this. Now, Jesus has been to Jerusalem many times in the last 3 years in his public ministry. This is the only time he comes in on a donkey. This is the only time he comes in proclaiming anything like that. And immediately people see this is something different. They've heard about the teaching that he's done. They've heard about the different miracles that he's performed. It was just not too long before this, that he had raised Lazarus from the dead. Bethany's only a few miles from Jerusalem. It didn't take long for people to hear about what happened right there on the other side of the hill. And so people were expecting something. Oh my gosh, is this guy really the Messiah? And then here he comes riding down the hill on this donkey. And so the people, wow, here it is. And so in John 12 through 15, this is the short version, it says, the next day the great crowd that had come for the festival heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel. Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, do not be afraid, daughter Zion. See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt. So, like I said, that's the condensed version of it. Sunday we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this kicks off this final week. And again, this is kind of where Jesus' ministry all comes to a head. It all comes together. This is what he has known he has been here for. This is what he has been preparing for and getting ready for. As we see in the story, his disciples still are a little bit clueless during most of this whole thing. But Jesus knows what I think somebody's locked out. Let me guess. Kids went out to play and now they're locked in the fence. Yep. Okay. So Jesus has been preparing for this. So it starts off with Messy Monday. Now, I don't know how many terms you're going to find in a commentary that say Messy Monday, but my wife really wanted to give each day a name. And so we start off with Messy Monday right after that Palm Sunday. Why did she say, oh, it's Messy Monday? Well, because we start with, in Mark 11, the temple tables being overturned. So Jesus makes a little mess of things right there. He goes into the temple area, and it says in Mark 11, 15 through 17, on reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. When evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. So again, kind of the condensed version of this. But Jesus went in and he turned over the tables of the money changers. Now, the money changers, if you watch The Chosen and you see the new season that's out there, they really do a pretty good job of displaying this. And what it is they had people that were there that were changing the money from Roman money to temple coins. And so you couldn't take Caesar's coin into the temple to buy a sacrifice or to pay for anything, because they wouldn't allow you to use the graven image, which was Caesar's face on the coin. And so you had to go to the money changers and say, I want to change my Roman money for temple money. And they said, great. Problem is, the exchange rate was insane. And so they were really ripping people off. Then people inside the temple courts, which it shouldn't have been used for this, were selling goods and things like that, such as animals to be sacrificed. That shouldn't have been going on in the temple courts. The temple courts are a place for people to come, to gather, to pray, to worship, and they turn it into a big market at the time of the festival. Why? Well, these people have all got to buy animals for sacrifice and stuff, and we're changing their money and ripping them off that way. We're charging them a lot of money for these these animals that are pure and clean, and they're guaranteed to pass inspection to be used as a deal, used as a sacrifice. So it really did become a den of thieves, a den of robbers. And it was being done right under the priests' noses and right under the Sanhedrin's noses, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were so legalistic. But there was a lot of money being made. And so, you didn't really have a choice. If you were going to get an animal that you knew was going to pass inspection, you couldn't bring it from very far. Because just bringing it there, it runs a risk of getting a cut, getting a scratch, having a leg get injured or something on the journey. And then you're out. By the same thing, you can't use regular money in there. So they've got you. You have to have their money. So you have to accept their exchange rate. You have to have an animal that will pass the priest's inspection, so you're kind of stuck paying the price they want to charge for it. And they were very happy to do this. And Jesus, as one of his statements at the beginning of this week was, I'm tired of this. This is a place of worship, not a den of thieves, not a place to be changing money, not a place to be selling stuff. So that's Messy Monday. So Monday of next week, remember Messy Monday. Teaching Tuesday. Why is it Teaching Tuesday? Because a lot took place on Tuesday. I mean, there's a list, and I'm going to show you some of these things. On Tuesday, again, Jesus went back to the temple, and his authority was questioned. So in Matthew 21, 23 through 27, it says, Jesus entered the temple courts, and while he was teaching, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him. By what authority are you doing these things, they asked. And who gave you this authority? Jesus replied, I will also ask you one question. If you answer me, I will tell you by what authority I am doing these things. John's baptism, where did it come from? Was it from heaven or of human origin? Jesus said, just simply answer that question. Simple answer. Heaven? Man. That's all I got to say. And as soon as you do, I'll answer your question by whose authority I do these things. It says, they discussed it among themselves and said, if we say from heaven, he will ask, then why didn't you believe him? If you're going to admit it's from God, why didn't you listen? Because you're supposed to be the priests and the teachers of the law. But if we say of human origin, we are afraid of the people, for they all hold that John was a prophet. And so now we got to explain why he wasn't, because they're all holding on to that he was a prophet and that he died for this prophetic message that he brought. And so he said, all you got to do is tell me which it was, man or heaven. And they went, we can't win. No matter what we say, we're stuck. Jesus was very good about this. They tried to make him make a mistake. They try to catch him in something. And so they try to get him to say something that the people could turn against with him. And Jesus knows this, and so he says, well, let me ask you a question first. All I got to do is answer it. I'll answer you. And they said, well, so they answered Jesus, we don't know. Then he said, neither will I tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. Case closed. You bring me your answer, I'll give you mine. And so this starts this Teaching Tuesday in the scriptures here. In Luke 20, 45 through 47, he talks about being aware of the religious teachers, which the religious teachers love so much. But he says, while all the people were listening, Jesus said to his disciples, beware of the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. That, of course, wins him some good brownie points with the teachers of the law and the leaders there. He says, these guys look religious, but they're not. There's no fruit. They look like they're something special. They have the right dress, the right robes, the right appearance. They make lengthy prayers. They talk really loud when they go out. They want everybody to honor them. They want everybody to respect them. Man, when they walk into the temple, people just jump. And they like that. And he says, but yet they walk out of here and they break God's law. They live for themselves. They do it under religious means, religious terminology, but really they're taking advantage of the people, and they have no problem with that. And they're not leading anyone to God. If anything, they're taking advantage of them and making people be a little bit leery of it. And so he says, beware of them, because they think that they have it all figured out, and they're going to wind up being punished most severely. Don't model your religion after them, because they don't get it. You need to work on that relationship. Remember, everything that Jesus is teaching is pointing to the kingdom of God. He's pointing to that relationship with God. He's pointing people to true worship with the Lord and not religion. Not just going through the motions, not just coming there when they need to at the festivals and offering the right sacrifices, but instead actually living and bearing fruit for God. So, this is where I made an executive decision. These are all the rest of the teachings on Tuesday. We are not reading them all, okay? So on that day, he tells the parable of the two sons. Two sons were asked to go out. First one, the father goes up and says, hey, will you go out and work today? And he says, no. And then he goes to the second son and says, hey, will you go out and work in the field today? And he goes, yeah, sure. The first one who said no winds up going out to the field and working. The second one who said, yeah, sure, doesn't show up out there. So which one did his father's will? Well, you got that example of this one saying, no, I'm not going to do it, but he actually does. This one says, yeah, I will, but does nothing. And again, you're back to that thing of, it may look good. You may say I'm doing these things, but you're not actually doing them. And other people who you say are not, or who may look like they're not, then wind up doing those things, and they're the ones who are actually doing the Father's will. And so that's one parable that he does. The other one is the parable of the vineyard. And so we have the parable of the vineyard, where you have the people who come in and they lease the vineyard, and then the owner of the vineyard sends a servant to go and collect the profits off of that, and they beat him up and throw him away, and he sends another one, they beat him up and throw him away, sends another one, beat him up. Finally, he sends his son. He says, they'll respect my son. And the son goes there, and they take him and they kill him, because they say, if we kill the heir to the fortune here, basically, then we can claim the vineyard for ourselves, because the owner's gone. And if we kill his son, we can just take it. And so they do. Of course, that's talking about what basically the people did there, the religious teachers in Jerusalem did to God. God said, this is my city, this is my temple, this is where my name is. And they came in and started taking advantage of things, and when he sent the prophets, they cast them out. And so finally he sent his son. And they put his son to death, thinking, then we can be in charge. But we all know the end of that story. So, okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think there are some of them that suspected it or questioned it, didn't really know, but yet at the same time also didn't accept it, because it would challenge what they were doing. And so a parable like that, and then I think some of them were just dense enough that they didn't get it. They didn't think, they're not talking about us. And that's very possible. I've told this story before, but there was a place in Israel that I went with when I first went over there with the school group. And we went to this Talmudic village. So it's a village that was set up, and they taught the Talmud and things like that. And it's a place for school kids and stuff to go and learn. And so it's kind of like a living history farm, but from the time of Christ, okay? Synagogue style, Sanhedrin type thing. And so they showed this video, and our professor said, go in there and watch this video with the other kids. So we're sitting there with the junior hires and whatever, and we're get our place in this this little theater thing, and we're watching this video. And in the video, the leaders of the synagogue come together, and they decide that they are going to throw this man out of the synagogue because they didn't like his decision that he made. So they come together and they have a vote, and they say, yep, we're going to cast him out. He's going to be kicked out of the group. That's final. And so a man goes into him and says, I was praying about this, and this is kind of the Jeff synopsis, so, whatever. But he was praying about this. He went in and he said, God told me that we should not kick him out. And they went, oh, really? And he said, yeah, God spoke to me and said, tell them not to kick him out. And they said, well, we have decided this. And the man says, but God also told me to let you see this. And he said, come to the window. And they looked out the window, and there's a river running down by the synagogue, kind of. And he says, to prove that God told me this, he's going to make the river run backwards, back up the hill. The river stops, runs back up the hill. And they went, wow, okay, we need to think about this. He's still out. Kick him out. And the guy goes, well, I was afraid you might kind of say this, so was God. So I prayed about it. God says, no, you need to leave him in. So he told me to do this sign. And he said, again, look out the window. Here's this big tree planted next to the river. And he says, to show you that God is giving this message, he's going to take that tree, uproot it, put it over on the other side of the river, and replant it into the ground, and it's going to continue to live. And so sure enough, they look out the window, and here's this big tree, fully grown, all full of leaves and everything, and it just picks up out of the ground, goes over, sits back down, continues to grow. He says, that should convince you that God has truly sent me to go and give you this message. And they went, oh, okay. We're still going to kick him out. He says, well, I have one more thing I'd like to show you. They said, okay. So he says, God has told me he's going to split this building. He's going to split it in half. It's going to open up and then come back together and heal itself like it's never been split. So they're sitting there, building starts shaking, kind of earthquake type thing, and the wall splits open, and then it comes back together, and you can't even see a crack. And he says, that should for sure convince you that God sent this message. So they took another vote, and they threw the first guy out and the second guy, the one that came and did those miracles. They cast them both out. And the movie ends. And we all went, what? And we're like going, what did we just see? And so we go back out, and the professor sets us down. And he goes, what you just saw is the mentality of the synagogue or even the Sanhedrin at the time of Christ. What they voted on and what they decided was final. If God had not put them in those positions, they wouldn't be there. And God put them in those positions to make those decisions. And when they make those decisions, not even God would challenge them. So when this guy came and did these miraculous signs and said they are from God, they said, yeah, but we have decided and God gave us that authority. Kind of ties back with, by what authority do you do these things? And so their authority was on matters dealing with the temple, the synagogues, the Judaism as a whole there. On those matters, those who were put in positions of leadership by God had ultimate authority. And God would not challenge them, because that's why he gave them that authority. If he didn't want them to make the decisions, he wouldn't have put them there. And so that's how the story ends. And we all went, wow. But then for me, and I think all the rest of the students there, we went, that makes the whole Jerusalem thing and make a lot more sense. Because they weren't looking for a message from God. They were looking at the leadership and saying, what do you say we should do? And their authority was final. And so that was just the mentality of a lot of them. So, you would think they would realize from what he had done and what they had seen and what they had heard, they would make out, that dude's the Messiah. But the leadership said, no, he's not. So he can't be. Because they voted on it. And he wasn't. So, a little crazy. The parable of the wedding banquet. King prepares a great banquet, gets ready for it. That night, nobody comes. So he goes and sends out his servants into the streets to bring in anyone who will come. And they put wedding garments on them and bring them into the banquet. Again, it's a foreshadowing and a telling of what's going to happen in the kingdom of God when the people who he prepared the banquet for refuse to come, refuse to listen. Then he's going to open it up to the Gentiles and let them come in and receive that reward. Paying taxes to Caesar, another one he does on that day. Give me a coin. Whose face is on it? Well, pay that to Caesar. But give to God what is God's. And so again, he's in the temple. He's kind of ticking people off pretty good at this point. And he basically says, if you're here, you don't have to worry about that coin or Caesar's taxes. This is Caesar's world. Go ahead and give him whatever he wants. Because God's kingdom is not of this world. And you need to give to God what is God's, and that is you. That is your being, your soul, your heart, your soul, your mind. And in doing that, he's reminding the people, don't get caught up so much in this world that you forget about what God has called us to do. And his law and his word and his, beckoning to us. And then I've got the parable of the 10 virgins. So again, some of them went and prepared, got extra oil, got wicks. The other ones did not prepare. And when the bridegroom returns, some were prepared, some were not. Some were taken in, some were left out on the streets because they didn't think he'd be that long and they didn't think they had to prepare. And so, whatever. And again, the apathy of the people, and he was talking about that. Then we have the parable of the talents. One is given more, another one a little bit less, and then one very little. And the one who had very little just buried it and gave the same talent back. The ones who were given more produced more, and God rewarded them with more. So we have that parable. The sheep and the goats. God will separate them on his right and his left, the way a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And that's got one of those really frightening points in Scripture where he looks at the goats and says, you go over here. And they went, but wait, Lord, look at all the things we did in your name. And he says, depart from me, I never knew you. People may do things in God's name, but if they have not given their life to him, they're really doing them for themselves. And so Jesus looks, or the shepherd looks at him and says, depart from me, I never knew you, which of course is a reference to Jesus. That's a scary part of Scripture because these are people who thought they were doing the right thing. But we did this, and we did this, and we did this. And he said, yes, and it meant nothing because you're doing it for you, not for me. And the other ones went, Lord, when did we do these things? And he said, when you did them to the least of these. When you did them to the people around you, not for show, but for some kind of real purpose. And so that's the sheep and the goats. The unfaithful servant, and then we have the fig tree. Of course, the parable of the fig tree. And that's what most of these are basically boiling back down to. And the fig tree is Jesus went out with his disciples and he teaches them about this and the fig tree and not producing and anyway. Looks like it's doing great things, no fruit. Needs to have fruit. Needs to have some substance to what they look like. And again, a reference to the religious leaders and stuff that looked perfect, but they weren't doing anything for God. They were doing it for themselves. So those are some of the teachings on Tuesday, Teaching Tuesday. They had a lot of things going on that day. Now, Wednesday, and this is one that I did not know, okay? I think this must be a fairly new title, but this is actually a title that's floating around out there, and that is Spy Wednesday. Anybody in here ever heard of Spy Wednesday? Okay, I hadn't either. And Anna's like, oh yeah, we're going to talk about Spy Wednesday. And I went, about what? Spy Wednesday. So here it is. Matthew 26, 14 through 16, Judas's betrayal. And so here is the scripture with it. And it says, then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, what are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you? So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. He became a spy. And so they attached that name to it, which is one of the reasons why my wife really wanted Messy Monday, because we have Spy Wednesday. Come on, we got to have something for Monday too, right? Teaching Tuesday, Spy Wednesday, Messy Monday, and there you go. All right. And then in Luke 22, 3 through 6, it's also talking about that Judas's betrayal of him, and it says, then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12. And Judas went to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and discussed with them how he might betray Jesus. They were delighted and agreed to give him money. He consented and watched for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them when no crowd was present. He knew Jesus' routine. He knew his patterns. He knew what he did. And so he's like, fine, I can find a time when he's going to be basically alone, and we won't have to worry about the crowds being around there. Because again, they didn't want to arrest Jesus during a time of public appearance, because the people that were there shouting, Hosanna, would mob these guards that tried to grab him. And so they're like, we don't want to start a riot. We don't want people to attack us. We don't want to have that bad image. We want to grab him someplace private, someplace secret, someplace the spy will tell us. So, Spy Wednesday. Then we have Thursday, Maundy Thursday. Anybody heard of that? Okay. If you've been around any kind of a Catholic, or not just Catholic, but Catholic, Lutheran, whatever, any kind of a traditional church, they are going to have probably a Maundy Thursday representative service of some kind, something like that. But now here's the big question is, what does it mean? Okay, I'll tell you 2 weeks from now. No, I'm just kidding. What does it mean? Well, here's what it means. Maundy refers to Jesus' washing of the apostles' feet. And it goes into another thing with it, but we'll explain to you why. The Latin Vulgate says, novum I can't even talk about it now. Mandatum. Novum mandatum, which means the new commandment. And so Jesus shows his disciples his servanthood. He lowers himself to wash the apostles' feet. But when he does so, he then gives to them a new commandment based upon that action. So what most people think about this is that Jesus humbling himself for the washing of the feet. But Maundy actually refers to that mandatum or mandatum, and it is that commandment or that new covenant thing that I give to you in a sense. So let me kind of try to explain this a little bit better. John 13, 1 through 17, it says, it was just before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet. You're the teacher. You're my Lord, my master. No, you're not washing my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." If you're not going to let me do this, if you're not going to listen to me, then you really are not honoring me. You're not listening. You're doing what you want to do. "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." And Jesus answered, those who had had a bath need only to wash their feet. It was a custom when you would come into somebody's home to wash your feet because you were walking on dusty, nasty roads and you didn't want to walk in there and take off your sandals and leave footprints across their floor. And so it was a customary thing, and it was also a sign of welcome and greeting that people would offer to do this, or they'd have their servant do this when you came into their home, and it would show that you were actually, welcome there as a guest and stuff. And so Jesus is doing this, humbling himself to be a servant who would wash their feet as they come in to prepare for this meal. So he says, if you've had a bath, you only need to wash your feet. And it says then, their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you. For he knew who was going to betray him. And that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet." Jesus is setting an example as a teaching moment for them. And then he says, "I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." Now, going on here to John 13:34, the new commandment that is talked about in that is, "A new commandment I give to you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another." So that's that new commandment that's talked about for Maundy Thursday, and it also talks about his servanthood to his disciples and setting that example of not being so full of yourself. I've said many times, if anybody was going to be prideful, it would have been Jesus. He did nothing wrong. And he did so many things, and people were following him, and people were calling him Lord and Master. And he says, "You call me that, and that's rightfully so, because I am. But I'm still going to wash your feet. I'm still going to be your servant. I'm still going to humble myself." And this is an example of what he's leading into when he ultimately humbles himself to death on the cross. That whole procession of him going to the cross is an act of humility and an act of servanthood and an act of suffering with that. So in Matthew 26 through 30, we have that first communion with his disciples there. And it says, while they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Okay? So here's that progression. They've sung the hymn. They've had their time together. They're heading out to the Mount of Olives. They've had their time together in the dinner. And then we jump over to Luke 22, 39 through 46, because the other thing that happens that evening is Jesus' trip to Gethsemane to pray. Knowing what he is walking into, this is still on that Thursday evening. And it's also a time of betrayal. So it says, Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. And it's interesting because it says right there, went out as usual to the Mount of Olives. And that's a key thing to know, that somebody who was in his inner group knew his pattern. And they knew he would be alone on the Mount of Olives praying, and that's where they could find him. And so Judas has the perfect opportunity to set him up. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down, and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he rose from prayer, he went back to the disciples. He found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." So we have this event of Jesus going to pray, the disciples being all weary-eyed, and they keep falling asleep, and he tells them, you need to be watchful. Don't fall into temptation. Don't let this drag you down with this. And he is praying earnestly, and then we get to Jesus' arrest. So it says, while he was still speaking, a crowd came up. And again, I'm jumping in through this, so it's not a fluid deal. But a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus asked him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. Great theological debate. Did he mean to cut off his ear, or was he trying to split him asunder? Was this disciple such a great swordsman, he just took off his ear? Or was he so novice with a sword he missed? You can debate that at home later. All right. So he struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his ear. But Jesus answered, "No more of this." And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour, when darkness reigns." Then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. So there's that interaction there. Jesus is taken up to the high priest's house, who was Caiaphas at that time, and he was held there that night. And of course, that's where we also have Peter's betrayal of him, where he comes, and we didn't put that in there because by no means is this a total exhaustive list of everything that happened during Holy Week, but this kind of gives you a sequence of some of the events that were going on. And so he's taken there. Peter follows at a distance. He has out there, when they start the initial stuff talking to Jesus, he betrays him 3 times before the rooster crows. Now, technically in Judaism, this is Friday morning because it's dark. So we're actually kind of into the events of Good Friday. So Good Friday says, Jesus is then before the chief priests and the teachers of the law. At daybreak, the council of the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the teachers of the law, met together, and Jesus was led before them. "If you are the Messiah," they said, "tell us." Jesus answered, "If I tell you, you would not believe me, or you will not believe me. And if I ask you, you would not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God." So he said again, you're asking me to say it. If I tell you, you ain't going to believe me anyway. You're going to deny whatever I tell you. So he said, I'll put it this way. From now on, I'm going to take my seat. It's at the right hand of God. To this, they freaked out. It says, they all asked, are you then the Son of God? He replied, you say that I am. Then they said, why do we need any more testimony? We have heard it from his own lips. So by their standard, Jesus has already condemned himself. And so we get into the next event, which is Jesus then is taken before Pilate, and he goes back and forth between Pilate and Herod, and he gets passed around. And, of course, they're doing this because even though the Jewish leaders have found him guilty, they have no grounds for putting him to death. They can't do it. It's beyond their reach. And so they need to have Pilate's approval to have him put to death. And so it says, then Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, I find no basis for a charge against this man. You guys have all come up here and told me your stories, and there's no reason for him to be put to death. There's no reason to even charge him with anything on the books of Rome. There's nothing I can charge him with. This sounds like a you problem, not a me problem. Then it says, but they insisted. He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in the Galilee, and he has come all the way here. On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. It's the time of the festival. And so Pilate goes, I got a way to get rid of him. He's a Galilean. He's not my problem. Take him to Herod. Let Herod deal with him. So it says in Luke 23, when Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He's looking at Jesus as being this miracle worker. Put on a show. Do something, Make a little show here for me. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there, vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. So Herod goes, I don't want to deal with him. Back to you. Tag, you're it. Here goes Jesus. And then it says, before this, they had been enemies. And then Jesus before Pilate again, while Pilate was sitting in the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message, do not have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. Which of the two do you want me to release to you? They asked the governor. Barabbas, they answered. What shall I do then with Jesus who is called the Messiah? Pilate asked, and they all answered, crucify him. Why? What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, crucify him. Oh. They shouted all the louder, crucify him, crucify him. And this is one of the things that you will hear me talk about probably this Sunday and next. It's amazing that the crowds were shouting Hosanna and Messiah on Palm Sunday, but by Friday, they're screaming crucify him. I don't know for sure because I don't have a list of the attendees, but I imagine there were people that were in both of those crowds that were welcoming him in on Sunday and screaming for his death by Friday because of what happened during this week. Matthew 27 through 31. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium. They gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. Then they twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him, and they took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. And in Matthew 27:35 through 37, it says, when they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots, which is also a fulfillment of prophecy. And sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head, they placed the written charge against him, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." And then moving on to 45 through 55, it says, from noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing there heard this, they said, "He's calling Elijah." Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar and put it on a staff and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "No, leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." Many women were there watching from a distance. And, they had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. And so that is the synopsis kind of that day when they took him to the cross and he died. Then we have Silent Saturday. And that is, again, something that's referred to by some people because you have this day that Jesus is in the tomb. Now remember, Friday started really on Thursday night. By this time we're going into that next day when he finally was brought down. They had to get him off the cross because he needed to be down and in the tomb before the sun set on Friday, because then it would become the Sabbath. And so the Sabbath day is a day of silence. It's a day that Jesus lay in the tomb. It's a day when we have no recorded events really of what went on. And then we have Easter Sunday. And for that, we'll talk about it in a week and a half. So make sure we, are here for that. So this week, Palm Sunday, and then just kind of think about the days as you go through next week and all the events that took place in such a short amount of time. And when you read the Gospels, you realize that each of them has a pretty significant chunk of them that is just those last 5 days, 6 days, including the triumphal entry. So much happens in that little block of time. So as we go into Holy Week next week, take time to remember all that Jesus did, but also why he did it. And that's for us. He came to fulfill the prophecies. He came to fulfill the law. And he did so when he died on the cross. And then he conquered death and hell and sin and shame and everything else when he rose again on that Resurrection Sunday. So, all right. Little synopsis of Holy Week. Hope maybe it answered a question somewhere along the way. Hope you got something out of it maybe that you haven't heard before. So, all right. Goodbye to people.